Back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to get into F1 and the steps you need to take if you want to make it into F1. Before we get started, if you do enjoy today's video, make sure to subscribe and like and turn on post notifications, and to follow me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. I post almost every day, and let's get into it. Now, first things first, I'm not an F1 driver. I'm not a pro racer, so everything I'm saying today is just based off what I found when I was doing research, the videos I've watched, and just things I know following the sport of F1. So just take that into, consideration with all the things I'm telling you. But today I'm just going to be talking about the basic steps that you need to take if you want to make it into F1. All right, so first thing you need to know, F1 is the hardest sport to be in. There's just 10 teams and 20 seats. There's a less than a 1% chance that you're going to make it into F1. But if you're up for the challenge, these are the steps you need to take to get into F1. So first step to F1 is karting. Not rental karting, but pro karting. The average cost per season for pro karting is around $4,000. Now, it could be less or more, but $4,000 is what I found the average to be online. But the average startup cost for the first year of karting is going to be around $10,000 because that year you're going to have to buy the cart. You could buy a used cart for probably around like $4,000 if you want to compete on the higher level. Of course, there's cheaper entry-level lower carts that you could start off in, but that's just around what it's going to be to get into karting. Now, of course, there are cheaper ways you could get into karting. You could buy stuff used. As I said, you could buy the cart used, you could buy everything used, and, it's flipping a coin with used stuff. Majority of the time, you will be fine with used. But yeah, another thing you could do cheaper is race for yourself. It's going to be much more difficult. You're going to be your own mechanic, your own manager, everything you're going to have to do yourself. But if it's either you race for yourself or you don't race at all, of course you're going to want to race for yourself if you have no other option. But that's the first step into Formula 1. You can't do anything else. Every F1 driver started off by karting. Now, your goal with karting is to build a brand and compete in all and any tournaments that you possibly can. Because with karting, you just want to get your name out there because think of karting as like you're building your resume for teams, sponsors, brands. So what I would recommend you doing in your karting stage is just trying to build a brand for yourself, focusing on winning tournaments, getting titles under your belt. And the easiest way to build a brand is just be active on social media, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and give a reason for sponsors to want to sponsor you. If you have a big following across social media, sponsorship companies will see you as an opportunity, not just to give you money. They actually, getting something in return, promoting products, promoting whatever. And especially if you have a large following, you could get racing equipment for free for just doing reviews for companies. So building a brand is definitely something you should be trying to do in your whole racing career, especially in karting. So now going to step 2, which is F4. Now you're in F4, you're still not in F1, you're nowhere close still. You're practically still at the bottom of the bottom. But let's talk about F4. How do you get into F4? Well, first, there's not just one F4. There's an F4 United States, F4 Italia, F4 French, F4 British. There's an F4 for almost every country. The most recognized F4, I would say the most recognized just because most F1 drivers are British, is the British F4. Drivers like Lando Norris did British F4. Sebastian Vettel did the Italian and German F4 series. Max Verstappen did the French F4 series. So F4 is something that all F1 drivers do. The average cost per season for F4 USA is around $200,000. And in Italian F4, the max cost is 100,000 euros. So that's where the big cost comes, where you're going to need to find sponsors. You're going to need to find people who are willing to give you money to race them. So that's where brand comes in play. But still, majority of racers and majority of drivers, that cost is majority coming out of your pocket. Unless you're just super good and there's somebody that wants to sponsor you, but majority of that cost is coming out of your pocket. Now, your goal for F4 is, of course, just to win the F4 championship, but just to hopefully now get picked up by a driver development program going into F3. Because now once you get into F3, that's where most drivers actually get picked up by a driver development program while they're in karting. But going from F4 to F3 is when you definitely want to be getting picked up by a driver development program. If you don't know what a driver development program is, that's F1 teams, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, they have their own driver development program where they just take young drivers and pay for their season or help them get into F1 to hopefully fill the F1 seats. So now going into step 3, F3. Now you're still nowhere near F1. F3 is just one step away from F2. F3 is very similar to F4. It's just a step up. There's only one there's the F3 there's only one. They do have Formula Regionals, but F3 there's only one F3. Now F3 is much more competitive because, like I said, there's only one F3. So when it comes to F3, I think there's 10 teams, 30 drivers, so it's very competitive. And this is where it's going to start getting hard. And because unlike F4, there's only one F3, 30 seats, and that's about it. So now going into step 4 is F2. Now F2, you're right there to F1, but F2 is probably the most competitive. Everybody, they want to be in F1. But at this point, if you haven't gotten picked up by a driver development program, you're really falling behind because F1 teams, want to promote their driver developments. They're not just going to go to any random people. But now you're racing at the same circuits as F1 drivers, so F1 teams are seeing you race them. And the thing about F1 and all F4, F3, F4, F3, F2, you have to remember that you drive in spec cars, so everyone's car is the same. So it's pure driver skills. So now you're racing at the same circuits the F1 teams are at, so you're being watched by F1 teams, you're on their radar. And that's another thing you want to do throughout your whole racing career. Your biggest goal is to get on the radar, especially here in the U.S. It's much more difficult because unlike in Europe where the majority of teams are located and there's so many large racing like the British karting championship, the Euro championship, the FIA karting championship, it's more of a European-dominated sport. So especially here in the U.S., if you're in the U.S., your number one goal is getting on the radar of teams and everyone and just building your brand and getting out there. Now, something you need to remember, in F2, if you win the F2 championship, you cannot race in F2 again. So what happens with a lot of drivers, if they win the F2 championship, they have nowhere to go. They can't go up to F1 because it's not an open seat, and they can't do F2 again because you can't do F2 twice if you already won the championship. So what majority of the drivers do is if they want to keep going trying for F1, they'll be a reserve driver, and they'll just sit in reserves for a while, years. But then what's the downside about that is you're sitting as a reserve driver. There's going to be drivers coming up from F2 that are going to be better than you, fresher than you, younger than you, that you're going to lose that seat. So this is at the point where at F2, even though you're so close, this is the point where a lot of drivers shift their focus to go to alternate series like the World Endurance Championship, Hypercar, Rally, at the IndyCar. Still big sports, but of course everybody wants to do F1. F1's the pinnacle of racing. So you just got to keep that in mind. So then step 4, of course, is F1. If you make it here, congratulations, you're the 1%. So now once you get to F1, this is the first time you're going to be making money. All the other series, this is the final time, you're not going to make your money back. From all the money you spent getting here, you're not going to make your money back for years. But I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, consider subscribing and follow me on Instagram. All social medias will be linked in the description. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to DM me. And I wish you luck, Formula 1, and your racing career.